So all of the organizations that, if they had values but didn't follow them, and I was at several of them, or they had no values, and I was at several of them, I either got fired or I quit. And it was like a mercy killing. I felt better the next day. Those companies that did have values like HP and Apple, I was able to thrive at.
Welcome back. Chris G here at Titan's Tale, and we got a treat for you today. All the way from Los Gatos, California, I have David Fradin. David's been working and kind of excited about with HP, Hewlett Packard, and Apple. But please welcome David.
Glad to be with you.
David, can you tell a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Yeah, I went through, graduated at University of Michigan in interdisciplinary engineering. Started the flying club there, and then my sophomore year, I started a nationwide student organization in support of the American Supersonic Transport Project out of the Department of Transportation. After that was shot down by Congress, there was the perception that there was a very strong anti-technology feeling in the United States, blaming technology for our environmental ills, when in reality, all technology is the organization of knowledge for practical purposes.
Mm-hmm.
So it can either do good or it can do bad, depending upon how we organize and utilize that knowledge. So I changed the name from Fly America's SST or FAST to Federation of Americans Supporting Science and Technology. And we lobbied Congress with our 40 student chapters that I started across the country to fund the space shuttle program. We were successful in that. And then also did the first National Energy Youth Conference at Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and to work on project independence and to move ourselves towards alternative energies. That one I was a lot less successful in 50 years ago. And while a lot has changed in the last 5 years, we'd be further ahead in our economy if we had started the change 50 years ago when I and my fellow 15,000 members advocated for it.
Was that the Nixon administration or?
Yes. And after I graduated, I couldn't find a job, so I moved the Student Association's headquarters to downtown Washington, D.C. In fact, I was in D.C. a couple miles away from the White House when Nixon resigned. After a while there, I said, I can't be a student anymore. So a group that was formed in Minnesota called the Environmental Balance Association recruited me to come there to balance economic, environmental, and energy needs. And I helped develop the concept of environmental mediation as a far better way of resolving our economic, environmental, and energy disputes. I resolved a dispute over a Anheuser-Busch malt plant in Moorhead, Minnesota, creating about 30 jobs. And then I was deeply involved at the end of the reserve mining lawsuit, which at the time was the largest and longest going environmental lawsuit in the nation. I then got involved in politics, helped Al Quie win election, was asked to run John Connally's presidential campaign. And then after that loss, Hewlett Packard recruited me and moved me to Palo Alto because they were having difficulty siting new facilities. And since I had expertise in that, they wanted me to handle community relations for a number of new facilities in North Dakota and California and in Washington State. And one of the first things I did there is I noticed that there was no word processing in the PR department, yet everybody knew how to type. And I had had word processors dating back to my FAST years. So I introduced an internal software program that ran on a mini computer as word processing for the department, which turned out to be effectively an inside product management type of role. And one of the nice things about HP is that they let people transfer laterally. So I then moved out to one of the divisions as a office systems product manager. And that's when Apple noticed me and they recruited me to come to Apple and bring the first hard disk drive to market on a personal computer. It was very, very big in size. It was 5 megabytes. about the amount of space that this podcast has consumed in the last few seconds. And nobody could figure out why they would ever need that much space. And it was very, very cheap. It was only $3,500. So I brought the product to market with a product marketing manager. And since I had my experiences in managing, starting the Flying Club, FAST, Environmental Balance Association, senior Apple management noticed that I knew how to manage. And the product manager for the Apple III, group product manager, had moved on and founded Electronic Arts. So they asked me to take over as the group product manager. About 2 or 3 weeks into my position, Steve Jobs convinced the executive committee to cancel the product line. And didn't ask me, even though I was 100% responsible for the product line, which was the Apple III and about 500 other associated products, and represented one of the 2 profit centers in the company. But a week later, I was coming out of corporate headquarters, and Ina Cole, who's then the marketing director of the division I was in, she later went on to become international vice president of Microsoft. She ushered me into John's office, and John wants to see you. I said, John, who? She said, John Scully. He says, oh, yeah, I've heard of him. I've met him a couple of times. So I walked into his office, which was a little kind of a small conference room. He was sitting at the end of the table looking at a super VisiCalc spreadsheet. And I just sat down across from me. On my left was Joe Graziano, the CFO of the company, who later went on to become CFO for Sun Microsystems. I think he actually was involved in taking them public, and then after a few years came back to Apple. And then the kitty corner for me was Del Yoakum, who was VP of manufacturing, and later became president of Apple a few years later. So Scully turns to me and says, Dave, we have $20 million in piece parts for the Apple III spread across our manufacturing facilities in Singapore, Dallas, and Cork, Ireland. What should we do about it? Well, $20 million in 1983 is probably about $200 million today. And the company's sales at that time were well under $1 billion. So it would have been a significant financial hit on the price of stock options that John Scully had. So he says, Dave, what should we do about it? And I said, what do you mean we, paleface? And he didn't laugh. So I had to explain the joke to him that a Lone Ranger, who was a good guy in a white hat and a white horse named Trigger, was galloping across the Arizona desert with his sidekick, an Indian sidekick. And when I tell this story to Indians from India, I have to say American Indian sidekick, Tonto. And the Lone Ranger turns to Tonto and says, Tonto, we're surrounded by 10,000 yelling, screaming American Indians, and all they want to do is scalp us. What should we do? And Tonto says, what do you mean we, paleface? And I said, John, you went off to Pahara Dunes and you canceled the product line, and you didn't ask me what I thought about it. And he says, okay, what should we do about it? I said, give me the independent authority commensurate with the responsibility, and we will take care of the product line and continue to treat it as a cash cow, which was later identified by the Boston Consulting Group as a cash cow. You know, getting 4 years after the product was introduced, the profits out of it that the company should earn. And I said, you know, the Alpha General tried to develop a new mini computer in their corporate offices, and it was shot down by the bureaucrats there. So they moved the development to Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina, to Research Triangle Park, where they developed that new mini computer. IBM for years tried to develop a PC, personal computer, to compete against Apple. They couldn't do it, so they finally moved the headquarters of the PC group to Boca Raton, Florida, to be as far away from the salespeople at IBM headquarters in Schenectady, New York, as they possibly could, because the IBM salespeople were afraid that if they had a PC, it would cannibalize their huge commission checks. And they were able to develop it. Coincidentally, also in Schenectady was the biggest company in the world at the time called Kodak, and they too tried to develop digital photography, but the salespeople shut it down because they thought it was going to threaten their film sales, and now they are a fraction, a shell of what they used to be. So, and then I said, my friend Kelly Johnson, who was the head of the Skunk Works for Lockheed, who I met through my involvement in the supersonic transport, Kelly in his skunk works out in the Palm Desert could develop an advanced airplane like the X-1, the X-15, the XR-71, and many others in about 18 months from concept to flying, while the rest of Lockheed would take 7 years. So if you give me the authority commensurate with the responsibility, we'll take care of the product line for their loyal 50,000 customers so far, and another 25,000 that we would sell the piece parts and the inventory into. So a few days later, I organized a group of about 70 people in the company to contribute information to a business plan, and a core group of 7 of us wrote a 80-page business plan covering all aspects of the product line, development, engineering, everything except manufacturing, because Dell would take care of that if we decide to continue the product line. And then on July 15th, 1983, I presented the business plan and its options to the executive committee. And that day will live in infamy, at least in my mind. And we laid out 5 options. One option was to shut the product line down like the executive committee had decided a month before or so, or continue the product line. So Floyd Kwame, at that point, who was then VP of Sales and Marketing, former VP of Sales and Marketing for National Semiconductor, and he had brought out from National Semiconductor the first digital watch. He said, Dave, if we choose these 2 options of shutting down or letting the product continue and let the market decide, and a dealer calls you, what would you say? I said, if you let the market decide, then what I'll do is tell the dealer that as long as people continue buying the Apple III, we'll continue to support it, develop it, maintain it, train on it, and so forth. But if you decide to shut the thing down, knowing that Apple had a set of values that they followed, things like empathy for our customers, achievement, aggressiveness, positive social contribution, individual performance, team spirit, innovation, vision, individual growth or reward, quality, excellence, and most importantly, good management. So I said, if you pick the option to shut the product line down, knowing full well that would be in violent opposition to the company's values that we all learned about when the first day we came in to the company in our orientation. And unbeknownst to me, Ann Bowers was sitting in the back of the room. She was VP of HR for Apple. She was also VP of HR for Intel at the same time. And she was married to Bob Noyce, and Noyce had copied the HP way, which was HP's values. And I suspect she was instrumental in getting Apple to develop values about 5 years before I was presenting at the executive committee. So I said, if you guys decide to shut the product line down and a dealer calls me, what I'll do is give him your phone number. And everybody laughed, because then he would have to explain the decision to go against Apple values. So everyone laughed, and about a week later, previous general manager Ken Zerbe of Apple Europe came home, and he was picking up all the garbage products in the company, and he was given responsibility for the Apple III. So he called me up and said, I hear you know a little bit about the Apple III. We'd like to make you the business unit manager, the independent business unit manager for the Apple III product line. I said, what, not general manager? He says, no, we can't call you that. I said, yeah, but you know what the acronym business unit manager spells? BUM. So you're going to make me the bum of the product line. And he said, yeah. And he says, you can hire 17 people. We'll give you a $4 million budget. You can spend up to $200,000, no questions asked. You just sign the check yourself. And we went out, sold 25,000 Apple IIIs, made about $600 million in profits, enough money to keep about 1,000 to 1,500 Apple employees employed for another year or so, and enough money to pay for Steve Jobs' Macintosh development.
Well, there's a tale, ladies and gentlemen. That is awesome. That was great. When you're making all these decisions, or when you're getting together, you're writing business plans, you're doing whatever, what kind of culture, well, I guess did Apple have, or what kind of culture is necessary for that type of engagement?
It's an agreement on values. And that's one of the reasons that both Apple and Hewlett Packard have been successful for so many years. When I started writing, researching my book, Building Insanely Great Products, which, by the way, is available on Amazon, um, I had familiarity with all the Fortune 500 companies on the Fortune 500 list from 1965. So I decided to make a list of those companies. First column is, did they have values? Second column is, did they follow those values? And the third column was, they had no values. About 300 of them or so had no values, and or they did not follow their espoused values, like Volkswagen did not in its diesel car scandal, which has cost them tens of billions of dollars because they didn't follow their values. Those without values, generally, all of them have gone out of business since 1965. The others that did have values, like Apple and HP, are still around today. So that, in my mind, is the most important thing that a company can have when it gets started, is to agree upon a set of values and make sure that everybody internalizes them. Because every time they go into a meeting or to make a decision or come to an agreement, in the background is that they're coming from the same set of values.
While it's important everywhere, it's probably more important in the small business world. And I don't mean that to take it away from the large ones, is that like you said, Volkswagen can cost them tens of millions of dollars. They're big enough to absorb that loss. A small business may not be able to.
Exactly. They'll go out of business.
Yeah.
And after I did that, I thought, I wonder if values has anything to do with my career failures and successes. So I made a list of the 25 different organizations I've been affiliated with over the years, some nonprofits, some homeowners associations, some for-profit companies, some of the startups that I started or others started. And again, I had three columns. Did they have values? Did they follow values? And the third column is, did I agree with those values? Like, I would never work at a company that believed that the values of Atlas Shrugged from Ayn Rand. Because I remember back in the Nixon administration, I was sitting in the executive office building next to the White House with the consultant to the president on technology, a fellow by the name of Bill Magruder. He was formerly the head of the SST project based out of the Department of Transportation. The first time aeronautical advances were going to be funded on a civilian basis and not out of the military. And Bill was considered the father of the astronauts. He was the chief test pilot on the B-52, took the first plane from Boeing Field in Seattle, flew it down to the Palm Desert Air Force Base down there, and landed wheels up. And there was going to be a court martial. So they investigated it, he researched, and it turns out there was a flaw in the landing gear system, and he designed a part to fix that flaw. And it's the only part at that time of the U.S. inventory called the Magruder, named after Bill Magruder. Now, has no relationship to the other Magruder in the Nixon White House, Jeb Magruder. So he was then appointed special consultant to the president on technology. And he put together a program called the New Technology Opportunities Programs, which included things like putting EMT, emergency medical transports, scattered out throughout the city rather than concentrating them just downtown, which saved probably by now millions of lives, rapid response to heart attacks and that kinds of things. They developed a new helmet for firefighters, a new oxygen bottle for firefighters that was smaller and compact, so the firefighter could get through a door, and on and on and on. New projects in forestry, new projects, cold seal asphalt, so you didn't have to heat up the asphalt to patch up holes in the streets and so forth. And I was sitting there chatting with him about technology and stuff, and the space shuttle and the energy program. And Bill says, "Have you read Atlas Shrugged? What do you think of Ayn Rand?" I said, "I don't know anything about it." He says, "Well, everybody here in the White House is reading it. And it is that story that tells people to have the values to make a profit and forget everything else. That all of your societal merits would take care of itself if all companies did was just make profits. And of course, when all you care about is profits, you tend to rip off the environment in exchange for those profits. You tend to rip off your employees in order to exchange to make those profits so that you can boost your stock price for your shareholders and for your options. And that's what executives at companies back then, and to some extent today, still do, is to boost the value of their stock options so they can make money off of that. So that's what stuck with me is if I worked at a company, going back to my values evaluation, and they had values I didn't agree with, like Ayn Rand's profit at all costs, I would not be very happy there. So all of the organizations that, if they had values but didn't follow them, and I was at several of them, or they had no values, and I was at several of them, I either got fired or I quit. And it was like a mercy killing. I felt better the next day. Those companies that did have values like HP and Apple, I was able to thrive at. So I mentioned that to a friend of mine who used to be my property manager for my vacation rental that I have on the ocean in Maui. And he came back to the Bay Area, was looking for a job. And he went into, and I told him, after they ask you all their questions, you ask them, what is the company's values? And he went into an interview a few days later, and he ended up talking about values for about 4 hours with his potential hiring manager. They hired him, and I asked him, he says, this is the happiest I've ever been to work at a company that follows the same values that I have.
What made you so confident about the Apple III? Was it market research? We're going to get into some key product success strategies and so forth, but going back to your experience.
But people that had the computer loved the computer, and they used it for years. I used to joke that maybe there was cocaine coming out of the keyboard, getting people addicted to it. It had a fantastic keyboard, and it also was built for the office and business market. That was the market that the engineers had in mind. So it could do word processing. It could do large spreadsheets like Super Visit Calc. It could do database type of work, and those types of things. It could also do electronic mail in the early days. I wanted to set up an electronic bulletin board, sort of the beginnings of the internet, so that the Apple III customers communicate with each other and with the corporate. And that turned out to be the same code base that AOL, American Online, was built on. I know this because I had lunch with Pete Burnite, who wrote the Apple bulletin board service for the Apple III, who had an engineering software development company in Santa Cruz. So I retained him and worked with him on the user interface. And then I told him a few years later when AOL came out, AOL Mail, I said, that looked awfully familiar. And he looks down into his lap, he says, yep, same code base. So people just loved the Apple III. It did what it said it would do. Plus it had the hard disk drive that I brought to market, the Apple Profile, so it could store a large quantities of information. And it's used generally for word processing and accounting and spreadsheet types of applications in small, medium, and large business offices. In fact, our number one sales area in the world was Houston, and I'm fairly convinced many of the Apple IIIs were used to manage the cocaine market coming out of Colombia at that time.
You had mentioned to me about the 5 keys to product success. And can we go through those now?
Sure. You can remember it in terms of the mnemonic for my company's name, Spice Catalyst. So the SPICE stands for something. The S stands for the product market strategy. Now, the market is like a grocery store. It's a place where you go. Marketing is the act to try to get people to go into that market and buy something. So when I say product market strategy, I'm talking about understanding your customer, understanding your competitors, understanding the technologies available, understanding your customers' personas, being able to do the product positioning, the value proposition, the pricing strategy, a market strategy, marketing strategy, and so forth. And there's about 32 components to that. And I go in detail in that in my book published by Wiley on successful product design and management. And by the way, you can find that book and Building Insanely Great Products at Amazon. Just search for my name, and these books come up under my name. So I have a whole chapter on those 30, or excuse me, a whole section on product market strategy. The P stands for repeatable processes. Harvard Business School teaches you got to have mature processes in order to be successful. One of my consulting clients on product success developed Wi-Fi products for education. And they developed 5 products, brought it to market, they all failed. And I asked them if they had a repeatable process that they would improve upon after each product failure. And the VP of Product Management said no. He says the lack of a process that we follow in product development results in everybody blaming everybody else. So it creates a culture of blame. It is not exactly the kind of teamwork you need to have a successful product. The I stands for the information necessary to make decisions. And many times when I was consulting for companies like Cisco and others, I would go to their corporate market research group, ask for information on the market that my division's products were in, and they didn't have anything. They said, we'll get it for you in about 6 months, long after my consulting gig is up. So you have to make decisions by the seat of your pants. You shouldn't have to do that. The C stands for the customer, and that's the most important letter in the SPICE name. And that's understanding what the customer wants to do, why they want to do it, when they want to do it, where they want to do it, how they want to do it, what's standing in their way, how important it is for them to get that thing done, and how satisfied are they with the current solution. An example of that is most innovation, which is really nothing more than doing something better, faster, higher quality, or with style, is the caveman or the cave woman used to draw on the walls of the cave with burned trees called charcoal. And they noticed that their hands got dirty, and they wanted to have to go wash their hands all the time. So they wrapped the charcoal in wood, and they called it a pencil. And then generations later, people noticed that the pencil constantly wore down. You have to always constantly sharpen it. So if they took a quill from a duck or something, and you an ink after you sharpen it, you could write with that a lot longer than you could write with a pencil. But people got bothered with constantly having to dip the pen in the ink and maybe spilling the ink on their document. So the ballpoint pen was invented. And then concurrently with that, we had the Gutenberg press, and then the mechanical typewriter, the electric typewriter, and then finally dedicated word processing like Xerox had and like Wang had. And I had one of the first Xerox word processors when I was running John Conley's presidential campaign. So I knew a little bit about that. And then word processing programs like WordPerfect, and eventually Microsoft Word came onto the PCs, and that's where we are today. In fact, now we're at the point with artificial intelligence is you just feed it a few thoughts and it writes the whole thing for you. And then you go through it, edit it, and you're all done. That includes making videos. You could just feed a few thoughts, and the AI program will go out, find the video segments, and do the voiceover for you all in one fell swoop in about 10 minutes, which would take normally 2 or 3 hours worth of editing, not to mention the time searching for your source footage. So understanding the customer and how satisfied they are, the lack of satisfaction is what enables the innovation to occur and for the customer to move along, like in my charcoal story. And that's important to do because you can't ask people what they need or what they want because they can't tell you. If they could tell you what they need and want, that means they have diagnosed what the problem is, and they have also innovated and invented the solution. And most people are not capable of doing that. And there's a historic story, which I think is true. Henry Ford, who had his new company called the Ford Motor Company in Dearborn, Michigan, not far from where I grew up in Detroit. he went out into the town and he asked people, would they want to have a car? And they said, I don't even know what a car is. No. How about would you like to have an automobile? I don't want an automobile. And if the internet existed and they're trying to figure out what product to make based upon the number of searches, he would have gone to the keyword search tools and found out at that time, early 1900s, nobody was searching for car and nobody was searching for auto. So therefore, there is no market for cars and automobiles. Yet if he had just come out of the saloon there in Dearborn, sat on the stoop with his beer, he would notice people galloping through town, whipping their horses to go faster, pulling carriages, wagons in order to carry goods. And their response was, no, we don't want a car, we want a faster horse. So that's why you got to start with understanding what it is that your customer wants to do, why they want to do it, when, where, how, what's standing in their way, how satisfied they are, and then how important is it to get that done. That technique can also be used to prioritize features, to make priorities of features in an existing or a future product as to what you develop first, second, and third.
What information are you looking for then? They're telling you what the customers, well, if the customers don't know what they want, what's the information doing for you?
You're finding out what it is that they want to do. And you do that by first observing what they're doing, like whipping the horse to go faster. And then you interview 40 to 80 of your target customers. If it's B2B, business to business, then it's 40 to 80 of your target business customers. Then you put together a survey questionnaire based upon your interview questionnaire. And you go out and find a representative sample of your target market of around 800 to 1,200, and you survey them. That tells you two things. One is what it is that people want to do, and therefore you can develop a product or service to solve that problem. And second, it tells you what the potential is for those particular personas to buy your product and at what price point. And you could use those numbers from a market research from the bottom up to figure out how much you should spend on product development and what your sales might be, and therefore what your potential return on investment might be. That's not only important if you're a big company to convince management to fund the development, but also if you're a startup and an entrepreneur, it's the numbers there that you can show to potential angel and venture capitalists to invest in your company, because the thing they care about is getting their return on the investment.
You said that your Apple III, the funds from it help support Steve Jobs' iPod, right? Idea?
No, Macintosh.
Macintosh, sorry. Why was Macintosh different than Apple III?
It had a graphical user interface and a mouse. Steve went to Xerox PARC, the Palo Alto Research Center for Xerox. He saw, I think it was the Alto computer that they had invented there, and it had a mouse. I think it had 3 buttons on it, which you could use to point at things on the screen. And the interface was graphical and consisted of pixels rather than fonts and text. But that product was flawed, the first Macintosh, because it only had 128 kilobytes of memory, and the largest program you could have on it, if I recall correctly, is about 10 kilobytes. So the word processing and the spreadsheets were very, very limited. And since the thing only had 128K of storage, which Steve insisted on, because he wanted it to sell for under $2,000. And he hyped it so well, he was a good hypester, that 100,000 Macintoshes were sold in 1984. But by January 1985, people realized you can't do anything with it. I had since left Apple and went to a company called Smooth Talker, where the engineers there had developed a way of doing text to speech. So you could type something into your Mac and it would say something. And after I sold, I forget what it was, about $4 million or $6 million worth of this to all the dealers that I had a relationship with around the world, I then started surveying customers to see if they were using the product the way we were encouraging them to use it, like to read back something that they've written or to read the spreadsheet back to them as for proofreading. When back then, a lot of people would read their thing they've written out loud, or they would have someone else read their spreadsheet to them so they could confirm all the numbers. And I figured if that was automated with Smooth Talker, that'd be pretty good. And we sold it. I think it's like $130, and was buying millions of dollars worth of that. We found out that its primary use was people would put their Macintosh on their dinner table during a party, and people would go up to it and type in swear words, see how the computer generated voice would pronounce the swear words. That was the number one use of it. So Apple Macintosh sales in January of 1985 dropped to 4 units. And Steve was fired about 4 or 5 months later for lack of performance.
The reason I brought that up was you mentioned in your stories about observing, and at least what I took your answer was, you observe that people like myself can't type very fast, but I can use a mouse a whole lot faster. Images seem to probably resonate faster than I say a word or words. And it's about the speed or the improvement, what they're trying to do, like you said, and y'all are finding solutions to those problems. Would that be
Exactly.
accurate? How long does it usually take to do a product evaluation? Maybe it depends on I guess it depends on the product or maybe even the company, doesn't it?
Yeah, it depends, but to do an effective product market strategy, which I strongly recommend you get done completely before you turn it over to engineering and start spending money on development. It takes calendar-wise about 3 to 6 months. Man hours or people time about 1 to 3 months. And a lot of people say, no, we don't have time for that. I said, well, what you're doing is inventing a process to fail quickly. And you will probably waste all of your money by not having put that together. I made that mistake in the early 2000s. I was credited by RCN magazine, which was covering the telecommunications business, as the first person in a company in the world to do advertising on a cell phone. And I had cell phone games for like Haleakala mountain biking, where you would coast down the volcano in Maui. And then when you fall off the side of the road, it will say this crash was brought to you by Zeal Optics or by Saucony running shoes, or K2 bikes, which were 3 of my sponsors. Then I invented another program, which was called Encore. And it was a pseudo cigarette lighter that would flash on your screen. And I had another one, and the Los Angeles Times noticed it because at a concert down in the Hollywood Bowl, when they wanted an encore, people would look into their pockets and realize they couldn't pull out their cigarette lighter because they stopped smoking. So they'll pull out their cell phone, put Encore, which was a flickering candle light, and hold it up and wave it back and forth to get an encore. And I thought that was a good idea. So why don't I do a virtual personal fireplace? And so that when you're out on that hot date and you want to have a romantic environment, you just pull out your cell phone, turn on the fireplace, and set it there on the dining table. That probably caused a lot of marriages as a result of that.
I turned on the virtual fireplace come Christmas time because I don't have a fireplace in my house. And
yeah,
my girls come in, what are you doing, Dad? I said, well, I grew up with a fireplace. We're having a fireplace. Come up with your presents. Be quiet. Let me enjoy it.
I had not, for the company called Maui Games, I had not done a product market strategy. And I decided that the development for these little games and things that I just described, we would develop it for a Nokia cell phone, which turned out to be, Nokia told me, their developer relations, that it was the most popular cell phone around the world. So I got it done, and I wasn't getting any sales in the United States. So I researched it and found out there was only 2 Nokia phones sold by all the major carriers in the United States. And they were on, I think, AT&T, and they were not powerful enough to run my games. So I had no distribution channel. Yet my sales force was in the United States to sell ads on on
The
these
game.
games.
Yeah.
Uh, and I had about 10,000 installations, they call that ad inventory in Europe, because the Nokia phones were very popular in Europe because they were cheap. But I had no sales force there. And most US companies at the time had little interest in advertising in Europe, including the ones like K2 Bikes and Saucony and Zeal Optics. So I went out of business. I had spent all of my money that was available to develop for the wrong market because I had not yet done my product market research. Going back to the Apple III, one of the first things I did was to go downstairs to talk to a fellow by the name of Raskin, or I forget his first name offhand. He was one of the chief architects for the Apple III. And I asked him, what is the product? Who did you build it for? And he told me people in the office and people in small business. But all these genius MBAs in Apple marketing throughout the companies, and Apple hired a lot of MBAs, they couldn't agree as to the market that the product is targeted at. It took the engineers, Jeff Raskin was his name, to tell us what the market was, to define the market for us. And as a result of all the infighting within the Apple marketing managers, that contributed greatly to the on-again, off-again support of the product line by the Apple employees. And because that was about to raise its ugly head again in about May of 1984, I decided to cancel the product line the same day that the new Apple IIc was introduced. The result was the Apple IIc was introduced. The Wall Street Journal, for example, talked about it in depth and mentioned that the Apple III had come to the end of its life. Didn't affect the stock price at all. A few months later, when Steve Jobs took over the Lisa program, which he hated because he thought it competed with his beloved Macintosh, because the Lisa had the first user interface with a mouse, graphical user interface. And Steve couldn't get along with anybody, so they banished him to a building about 4 blocks away from corporate headquarters called Taco Towers on Stevens Creek Boulevard near, at that time it was called Deanza Boulevard. And the outside of the place looked like a Taco Bell. And he decided they're going to be the rebel force. So they flew a pirate flag out in front, and they thought they were so smart about knowing what the market wants that the sales of their product dropped to just 4 units. So that's why I say there was a bad Steve Jobs and a good Steve Jobs. After he went off, after he was fired by Apple, he started a new computer company called Next. And by that time, I was the associate director of the personal computer research service at a market research firm called DataQuest. And I'll never forget when the reporter for Business Week came into my office and asked me, what do you think about Next? And I said, last. And sure enough, it failed, I think, in less than a year or two. And the reason being is that Steve did not properly position the product in the marketplace. I just found out a few years ago that what the product really did is that if a professor was doing research at a university and had to wait in line for the timeshare mainframe computer to run his program, he couldn't get his research done. And I knew a little bit about that because when I was in engineering school at Michigan, we learned Fortran. And so we programmed in Fortran on computer cards. And I finally was able to get my program to run by spending the night in the computer room, waiting for my deck to be processed by the IBM 360 mainframe computer. So what he had invented for a mere $10,000 is to take this multi-million-dollar computer, stick it on the professor's desk, and he or she could get their work done. But he didn't position it that way. He tried to position it more like the Lisa. And everyone was confused. Why would we spend $10,000 for that when we could buy a Macintosh for $2,000? And so Next did become last. But I found in my research that he went and sought out mentoring from David Packard of Hewlett Packard. And I knew Dave a little bit because I handled his personal PR on the board when I was in corporate PR at HP. And Packard taught him that you're the one that should cannibalize your own products. Don't cancel them like you've tried to do with the Apple III and like you did with Lisa. Just cannibalize them with a better product going after the same market. Because if you don't cannibalize it, somebody else will. And Steve learned that lesson well, because later when he was involved in inventing the iPod, which cannibalized the MP3 players coming from other companies. Like Sony owned the personal portable marketplace with their, what was it called, the Discman or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Play a cassette tape, and later you could play a CD.
Yeah, you carry
it around. And there were a few MP3 players on the market. The thing Sony didn't do is invent something like an iPod, which was crazy because that was what they were all about. So they failed to cannibalize their own product. Perhaps for the same reason. And later, when Steve was involved in the iPhone development, it was 3 products. It was a phone, it was an iPod, so it's going to cannibalize the iPod market, and it was a camera. And today, if you look at the iPhone, who cares about the telephone? It's a hell of a good camera.
Mm-hmm. We're about out of time, but I have one more question. You're a very, very imaginative man with ideas. How do you come up with those ideas, or what do you do with them when you have them, and maybe now's not the right time to deal with them?
Well, there's 2 things. One is be a keen observer of human and business behavior, which what I was talking about, and understanding what it is that your customer wants to do. And then what was the second part of your question?
Well, then sometimes people like myself, I'll say a squirrel, go chase this shiny object, and so you come up with a lot of great ideas, I'm sure. When do you decide that it's time to deal with those, or do you put them in a list, or you have them just sitting somewhere?
You have to find the window of opportunity. And as Tony Ulrich's stratagem talks about, Synergem up in San Francisco, in order for a product or a service to become successful, you have to find 15 unmet needs. So if one of my students at Cisco asked me this question a few years ago. So I said, what you do is you wait until you've identified 15 unmet needs. And those unmet needs are not being satisfied by something else. And then you can develop a product or service for that. Then when you have competitors solving those same unmet needs, you become what the Boston Consulting Group calls a cash cow. And you just milk the product, they'll spend much more on research and development. So if you do all of these things, you won't be one of the 35% of all products that fail each year, representing a worldwide waste of over $1 trillion, because you didn't follow these 5 keys to product success, or SPICE.
David, thank you for your time today.
Glad to be with you.
And I know anybody can look at David's books on Amazon at David Fradin, Fradin. But David, if somebody wants to reach out to you, how would they do that?
They can send me an email at dave@spicecatalyst.com, or they can go to my website, spicecatalyst.com, and get in touch with me there and connect with me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. So if you guys are out doing something right now, like running, jogging, exercising, and didn't get that, you can always go to titansTale.com, go to the directory of guests, and you'll find David's information right there, along with all the other great guests we've had. David, thank you for being a Titan. It's been a pleasure.
Glad to be with you.
Bye-bye.